Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. You know, it's funny, I had a different episode lined up for today, yet again, the events that happened or unfolded this week made me realize that, hey, you know what? I think the universe is trying to tell me that I should change it up and perhaps do a different episode instead. So in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about limiting beliefs. I'll outline how to identify them and also how to shift them or shift the power from them, as it's our limiting beliefs that can define what kind of reality we experience in our lives. I also want to bring to light a common misconception about limiting beliefs, that being that we have to heal from them or that we have to really focus on trying to let them go or release them. But later on in this episode, I'm going to explain to you why this simply isn't true. So this week, I actually had some sad and unexpected news that a friend of mine had actually passed away. And this was completely shocking news for me as her death was very unexpected. We weren't super close friends, but we had a friendship where we could go months without talking, but could pick up right where we left our last conversation. And yeah, I deeply respected her as she was one powerhouse of a woman in both business and in everyday life. But after the initial shock and numbness of this news wore off, the grief set in, and I found myself not feeling my usual energetic and chipper self, which is absolutely normal and okay to experience when we hear of any shocking news. I've been through grief before and have lost friends before, so I knew to give myself plenty of time and plenty of space. But what was interesting was that this news had actually triggered one of my very deep-rooted beliefs that I had around having my energetic gifts and my connection to spirit. This limiting belief being that my energetic gifts are a burden, not only for myself, but for others too. So let me just unpack this a little bit for you guys and share how my limiting belief was triggered. So I had only just been texting with her, my friend, in January, and we were planning to catch up over Zoom as it had been quite some time since we've caught up properly. Not only that, I had also just channeled a message from my guides at that time, and the message I had received was actually for both her and I. So I was really excited to share this message with her as it seemed very important. The message that my guides had shared with me at that time was that I was stepping more into my true self and that I was finding my voice and was really starting to shift my limiting beliefs that I had around being heard. They also said that I was shifting or balancing some karmic energy that had actually first started in the spring of 2018. And so after receiving this message from my guides, I thought back to the spring of 2018 and realized that it was during that time that myself and my friend had gone through a very intense event where we both had to stand up for ourselves and others and speak up about some things that weren't right or okay. During this channeled message from my guides back in January, they also told me that the energy of me finding my voice that first started coming in spring of 2018 was actually connected to the wave of energy that was going to be coming in the next few weeks, which was actually connected to the Saturn squaring Uranus energy that we actually just experienced this week. Not only that, they also had told me that my friend was also completing a karmic cycle and that things would be shifting for her too. And that both of us had formed a bond at that time as we both needed to activate this energy of finding our voice and speaking up for ourselves. And so, yeah, we'd went through this event together to help heal and also to help level up or bring change into our lives. But unfortunately, I never got to share this message with her, as it was only a week after receiving that download that she suddenly had passed away. So, upon hearing this news of my friend passing, I also remembered this message or download that I had received, and this instantly triggered me. And as you guys might know from the previous episodes I've done, I used to hold the limiting belief that I must hide from my energetic gifts and my connection to spirit, that it is burdensome to me and to others, and that it's all just too much or too much responsibility or too much pressure when I use my gifts. So after hearing the news of her passing, I found this limiting belief being triggered, and I started having thoughts of, well, what if I shared this message with her earlier? Would that have been enough for her soul to have chosen to stay and not leave? I even questioned the message that I had gotten from my guides. You know, when they had said she'd completed a karmic lesson or a cycle, did they actually mean that she was now going to leave this earth? Why didn't they warn me? I had so many questions and got really annoyed at myself for not doing more, or for not saying something, or for even have channeled the message in the first place. And not only that, I actually had received some more downloads from Spirit in the days after she had passed, before I knew she'd even passed. And they were downloads or messages for her or connected to her that had come through when I was busy during the day. So I'd just brush these messages off, thinking that they were messages from my guides, and that, yeah, I'd tell her everything when we were going to catch up. So I kicked myself and got really down on myself as I realized that it was actually, in fact, her or her soul reaching out to me in those days, not my guides. And how could I have gotten it so wrong or not known? But after a few hours of defaulting into that limiting belief, I caught myself. And I was surprised at how easily I slipped into the emotions and the thoughts that were connected to this old limiting belief. Yet after a meditation connecting to my higher self, I also could see the flip side of the coin. I realized and saw it how quickly I was able to identify this limiting belief and how quickly it was that I shifted out of it. I realized that the truth was my efforts of putting my power and my focus into my new beliefs were actually really starting to take effect, and that this old belief wasn't affecting myself and my reality as much anymore, as I only had slipped into this old limiting belief for just a few hours. Now, because I have previously identified this limiting belief before and have been actively working on forming a new one for about 4 months now, I simply knew that this limiting belief was not in fact true at all, and that of course there was nothing I could have done. And no, telling her this channeled information that I'd received wouldn't have changed anything, and it was just simply her soul's time to go. So, after I caught myself mentally and emotionally responding to this, feeding into this old limiting belief, then the obsessive and negative thoughts and worries actually subsided completely and did not come back or return. And now, you guys, this was a pretty big deal to me, because this limiting belief that I had was actually a deep-rooted limiting belief that I'd formed since childhood and that I'd carried with me and created a reality from for decades. So the fact that I'd only just simply slipped back into it for a couple of hours was actually a really good thing, and showed me that, hey, that's not my reality anymore, and that's actually not what I put my power or my focus into anymore. Now, I've shared in previous episodes how important identifying limiting beliefs is when it comes to co-creating with the universe and with calling in the life that you desire. This is because our beliefs are at the root of so much in our lives. They literally affect so much of what we do, how we think, how we feel, and how we act every single day. And I mean it, from the actions we take to the emotions we feel, from the job or the partner we have to the friends that we spend our time with. Even our personality and the hobbies that we have are affected by our beliefs. So, if we're wanting to call in a different reality for ourselves, and if we want to successfully sustain this reality, it is key that we become aware of what beliefs that we're putting our power and our energy into. Now, how to identify limiting beliefs isn't as complicated as you might think. You see, we have these really, really handy things called emotions, which are actually more like tools that let us know when we have a limiting belief that we may be unconscious of, that is looping down below in our unconscious or subconscious, that needs to be acknowledged. The thing is, for far too long, emotions have been completely misunderstood. Having emotions are not a bad thing at all. Feeling them is not a bad thing at all. They're truly a gift and can be used for so many things when it comes to co-creating with the universe. Now, I know, I get it. They may not feel this way when you're feeling them at the time, but this is where you need to know this little golden nugget of information. Your feelings are not really you. You see, you are just feeling them inside of you, which can confuse us and make us think that they are you, but they're not. They're just simply a tool that we can use to let us know when it is that we need to look at a belief that we have that may be holding us back. I always say that emotions are like little alarms. They are there to let us know, like a very loud bell that's ringing, when we have a limiting belief that's being triggered. Anytime that you're triggered emotionally, that is actually just your body's way of trying to tell you, hey, listen up, you have a limiting belief that this emotion is connected to, and you need to check it out. And here's the thing, you guys, whenever we're upset, what we think we're upset at isn't always the case. You see, if we break a negative emotion down and look at what is at the root of why we are really upset, what you will find is that it's actually a deep-rooted limiting belief that the emotion is actually connected to. And that is why you are feeling upset. Not because necessarily the event, but instead the deep-rooted limiting belief that this emotion is being triggered by. And usually these limiting beliefs have been with us and looping down in our unconscious and subconscious mind for many years and creating our reality, our very reality that we've experienced over the years. Let's just think of a really basic example. So, you might be upset one day that your partner doesn't notice that you've gone out and done all the grocery shopping, that you've cleaned the entire house, and that you've made them your favorite meal. They just simply come home, say hey, then go lay on the couch and chill and watch Netflix without saying much. So this action may make you feel upset. You may be disappointed or annoyed or upset or angry that none of your efforts were acknowledged. And you may spend the evening pouting or feeling sorry for yourself or even going to bed angry or upset. The thing is, those thoughts or feelings that you have and even the actions that you take in response to your partner's actions aren't necessarily all because of those actions of your partner. The actions of your partner are simply just actions that are triggering a limiting belief or reinforcing a limiting belief that you might have that's looping down below. The belief that you're actually truly upset about could be, I'm never noticed or seen, or I work so hard and it's all for nothing, or even, I can't ever do enough to make anyone happy. And you can see how sometimes maybe some of these beliefs might carry on in other areas of your life too. You see, we're meant to feel our emotions. We are meant to feel them out fully and wholly. Feelings are simply waves of energy or waves of information coming into our awareness, and we want them to come in and we want to feel them out. Emotions and feelings are so incredibly powerful for a reason. They are meant to get our attention. We are meant to feel them wholly. The negative or lower vibrational ones show us when we have a limiting belief that needs to be acknowledged, whereas the positive or the higher vibrational feelings let us know what it is that we truly love. They let us know what our passions are, what brings us joy, and then shows us what it is that we want to focus on and have more of in our lives. So now you can start to really see that this kind of makes more sense and that perhaps we've been taught the wrong thing for way too many generations. In the past, our parents or our parents' parents were taught to hide from their emotions, to suppress or avoid or not express them. And this is so incredibly far from what it is that we really should be doing with our emotions. It's not our emotions that are wrong or bad. It's the thoughts or meaning that we attach to our emotions is what gives our emotions the belief that they're bad. Now, I grew up in a household where no one really talked about or addressed their negative feelings or fears. Not only that, my parents were complete opposites. My mum was highly emotional, whereas my dad would shut down. And watching them both struggle with their emotional imbalances was really confusing as a kid, as both of them were constantly triggering one another. And then, because it was all so much and so painful, both of them avoided looking at what it was that was inside of them that was actually being triggered. So it was always a continuous cycle. And so, as I watched this as a kid, naturally, that's how I learned to operate. I learned to suppress and internalize my feelings. I learned that feelings were too much, or, they didn't feel nice, or they weren't a good thing. And so I formed the limiting belief that feelings were bad things to have, and I never felt safe expressing myself through emotions. And this was extremely hard to do, being an empath or being clairsentient and having the ability to tap into other people's emotions at all times. But as I grew older and wiser, I accepted that my empathic abilities and general feelings weren't anything to be fearful of at all, and that emotions and feelings are in fact powerful, powerful tools. So there we go. The first step in identifying our limiting beliefs is to simply just listen to what our emotions and to what our feelings are telling us anytime that we're triggered. That's because it's our emotions that are trying to show us that there's a limiting belief that needs to be acknowledged in order for us to heal, transform, or level up in some way. Or in order for us to have the reality that we desire, for it to manifest. And now that is what I did when it came to identifying my limiting belief that I had, which had been holding me back from starting this podcast, not to mention a myriad of other things in my life. As you guys know, I had a ridiculous amount of fears and negative emotions around starting this podcast. And when I dug deep into these feelings, into these triggered emotions that I was feeling and these fears that I was feeling, I realized it was because of the many experiences that I had had over the years that had reinforced the belief that using my energetic gifts was a burdensome thing and that it was something that I must hide from. I'd realized that I was afraid of telling people that I was psychic, that I could connect to spirit and predict timelines, simply because I was afraid of being rejected or afraid that I would cause hurt or pain to others. So over the many years, I avoided owning this side of me truly and fully because I was afraid of being rejected by friends and family. I wanted to be loved and accepted by my husband's family as they are religious and my belief systems are not in alignment with theirs. I also had some pretty wild and unexplainable encounters over the years where I'd have interactions with beings from other dimensions, as well as interactions with spirits, which completely blew my mind. And I gotta admit, it was a bit confusing at times. But not so much anymore, however, as it's these beings of love and light that are now my guides that I connect to. But when I recognized all of this and how all of these actions I was taking was connected to this limiting belief, I decided that I would dig deeper and get right to the root of this belief. I needed to see how this belief first formed. And so I did that. I dug deep and I realized that it was in my childhood when this first limiting belief was first initialized. And all of the other experience that I had had in my life thereafter was simply just reinforcing that belief that I initially formed in childhood. When I dug down and got right to the core, I realized that I had many memories as a kid in where my energetic gifts had confused me. But in particular, I had two very vivid memories or experiences which made me form the initial belief that my energetic gifts were bad or burdensome. So one of these memories I've actually already shared in one of my earlier episodes, which was when I was about 10 and I received the message psychically that my pa was going to die before he or the family knew that he even had cancer. Receiving this information was really confusing for me and I was so scared to tell anyone, so I kept it a secret. Which then made me think at the time that somehow me knowing about it before it happened meant that I was partly responsible for it. The other memory or experiences that I had was that I had several psychic knowings or visions that were connected to the several events around my parents' divorce. And now, out of respect for both of my parents, I won't go into too much detail here, but for many years, there was a lot of pain within my family, and a lot of it was kept hidden, avoided, or unaddressed for many years. And it was at this time, as a child, where I actually formed many limiting beliefs that were connected to my parents' divorce. But because there was so much avoidance of addressing the pain that we were all experiencing, then this actually only reinforced the power that all of our limiting beliefs we held actually had. Now, more specifically, as a child, I had actually had some psychic visions or psychic knowings about what was happening within our family. I used to have dreams or visions or knowings come to me, warning me of what events were coming up and that our family was going to be experiencing some pretty hard or tough times. And now this was pretty confusing for me as a child because on the surface, everything looked as if everything was okay and fine. Yet I would have these visions or dreams or knowings come to me, letting me know that actually everything wasn't okay and in the future wasn't going to be okay. And when these visions or knowings that I had came true and actually played out in our family's life, I, in a way, felt like I was responsible for it somehow. I used to feel guilty for years because I truly thought that because I would have these psychic knowings or these psychic visions, then I felt like it was my responsibility. I used to think, well, if only I had have said something or told someone about them, then maybe things would have been different. But on the other hand, I also was very well aware and knew that I couldn't explain to anyone how it was that I knew about these things that were going to happen. I knew that the abilities that I had were different and were abilities that not everybody necessarily had either. But after doing this work, after identifying this limiting belief and looking at what memories this limiting belief is connected to, where it was first formed, I now see this memory or this situation from a different perspective, from the perspective of my adult self. When I look back, I realize that in actuality or in reality, I was just a young kid with a completely different perspective and understanding that wasn't as developed as it is now as an adult. As a kid, we don't have the right reasoning skills or the right logic skills or understanding skills. And I also wasn't taught anything about having energetic gifts or abilities. So I was navigating all of this energy on my own and as a child. I was also dealing with sixth sense abilities that were associated with some very traumatic life events. Both of these events are hard to navigate and understand just on their own, even for a grown, mature adult, let alone a child. So needless to say, it was very confusing as a kid navigating all that was happening in my childhood, and I was confused by my energetic gifts and confused with the breakdown of my family and was dealing with my mum's breakdown too. I could see and understand that this was a lot for a child to deal with. So the ego part of my brain at the time formed this belief as a way to keep myself and my family protected and safe from this pain, and as a way for me to be loved, accepted, and understood, which is all I ever wanted as a child, and which is always at the foundation of what most children really want. I just want to say that I completely understand. Facing our fears and facing our negative emotions and addressing memories can seem scary and can cause us to feel anxiety. But what I honestly will say is, initially it can seem overwhelming and seem scary, and this is only because our ego part of our mind, just wants to keep us safe from the pain. So all I can do is give you my perspective from my journey, and that is that it's actually really not as bad as your mind or your feelings tell you that it's going to be. Especially when you have the understanding or the perspective of how the ego mind works, that it's there just wanting to protect you, and that our feelings aren't the true or inner real us, that they are just in fact tools to let us know when something needs to be looked at. And of course, this is really important here. Depending on how deep you want to go and depending on what trauma that you've experienced in your life, I will always strongly recommend seeing a psychologist or a therapist alongside of doing this work, especially with dealing with deep-rooted trauma. Okay, so here are the steps to take next time that you're triggered. And you can do this either at the time or later that day or that night or even later on in the week. So to begin, I highly recommend getting a journal and writing everything down in this journal so that you have it as a reference to look back at. So first you want to write down what the trigger actually was. Write down the situation, describe it. Then next, what you want to do is to ask yourself, well, how did it make you feel? And then you write down how it made you feel, all the different emotions. Then next you can ask, well, why did you feel that emotion? And it's really important here to be really raw and honest with yourself in writing down why. And after you uncover the why, ask yourself why you felt angry or why you felt hurt or why you felt betrayed. Then you can ask yourself, well, what did this experience remind me of? When was the last time I felt this way and thought this way? And think about it. Think back to the last memory or time that you have of when you may have felt the same way, and you write this down. Then you want to take it one step further, and you want to go back to your childhood, and you want to remember back to the earliest time or the first time that you ever felt this way, or that you ever formed the belief behind the emotion. So you can do this by taking some quiet time to really think about what memory that you have that is connected to this emotion or belief. Or you can also do this during a meditation and ask your subconscious to show you the memories that this belief and emotion is connected to. And then you can journal it down. And if any emotions come up while doing this work, remember and remind yourself that emotions are not a bad thing at all. These emotions are just tools to let you know that this limiting belief is holding energy or holding power, and that we simply just need to look at it and acknowledge it and not hide from it. And we want to feel these emotions. We want to feel them and let them out wholly and fully, so that we're not keeping it within us or ignoring them or avoiding them. Now, we go back to our childhood because it's in our childhood years, from the ages between around 4 to 15 years, that we first form our belief systems. And what you will find is, when you are young, we don't have the same understanding or awareness or tools as we do now. As kids, we usually form these beliefs and shadow sides of ourselves as a way to be accepted or loved. And so what you might find is the limiting belief that was formed as a child wasn't actually in fact true in actuality or in reality at the time at all. Yet to this day, we still continue to respond, react, and create our current reality from these beliefs. You know, you can look at my limiting belief as an example. I hadn't caused my dad to leave, nor had I caused my pa to die. I also hadn't done anything wrong, nor was there something wrong with me just because I was psychic. Yet my 10-year-old self at the time, with these limited capabilities, had formed these beliefs. And I'd formed them as a way to protect myself and as a way to be loved and accepted. So when we're going through this process, when we're breaking down our emotions and seeing what they are actually, what's at the root of what they're actually connected to, we can identify the limiting beliefs. We can bring it to the light to be acknowledged, for us to become aware of them and observe them. And this is so that we can see that they're actually not in fact true at all, that they're not in fact actually based on something that's real or true in reality. This then shows us that it has actually been us this entire time, by thinking, reacting, and feeling and taking actions from these beliefs, which have actually kept this limiting belief alive or true. So when we see this and acknowledge this, then it is much easier for us to see and realize that we don't need to hold on to this belief anymore, or we don't need to feed into this belief anymore. It's much easier for us then to decide to stop giving them so much power, because we can see that they are no longer true for us in our current reality. Okay, so next up, I want to share this very important message. Okay, you guys, you ready? So just this simple act alone of identifying our limiting beliefs and recognizing that they are no longer in fact true is actually enough on its own to help shift the belief. Observing, acknowledging, questioning, or doubting the limiting belief actually starts to take away or diminish the power or energy that we've put into these beliefs for so long. This is because A, we're no longer avoiding or running away from it, or the emotions that are connected to it. And B, we now see the situation from when we first formed the belief from a new perspective, from our adult selves, and not from our limited perspective that we had as a child. So we really want to get into the habit of doing this each time that we're triggered, because the more that we bring this limiting belief to the light and the more we acknowledge it and see it, the more its power is lessened. And as I mentioned in the last episode, the more you do it, the easier it gets. Not only that, the more you go through this process, the more you realize that you may have a limiting belief that's connected to many different areas in your life. Okay, so next up, I'm going to address a question that so many people ask me. And that is, well, how do I heal my beliefs? How do I let them go? They won't go away. They keep coming back. And I'm going to be really straight up here. You guys ready for this? You don't have to. Yep, you heard right. This is a common misconception in the self-improvement field. We don't actually need to actively heal or try really, really, really hard to let go of these beliefs. There's no dispelling or letting go rituals or ceremonies or meditations or even spells that is needed at all. You don't even need to replace an old memory with a new, more desired memory in order to rewrite a new belief. Nothing like that. But let me just take some pressure off you guys and let you know that you don't need to let go of or heal or dispel any of your limiting beliefs. All you simply need to do is just to continue to acknowledge them and become aware of them. As again, this is what takes away the power that is connected to your limiting belief. If we're constantly worrying about having to let go, or I really need to let go, and if we're worrying and thinking that all the time and putting our energy or our power into that, well, then that is what the subconscious will create. It will create more experiences that will cause you to worry about letting go or to keep continuing about obsessing over these thoughts. It's this constant obsessing or worrying that is actually causing you to hold on to this energy. The truth is, when it comes to shifting limiting beliefs, all you need to remember is that wherever you put the most power or energy into is where your subconscious will create from. And there are two perspectives in order to shift the power from these beliefs. First, you can identify and acknowledge the limiting belief, as I mentioned earlier. And you can also choose to form new beliefs and shift your focus or power into a new belief. And that's it. So after you identify your limiting beliefs or beliefs that have been holding you back, you can then, if you want to, choose to form a new belief. And you can choose to form one that is more in alignment with what it is that's true for you. That is in more of an alignment with the reality that you want to bring in. And so then you can actively put all of your thoughts, attention, and focus into that belief instead. And now, to really solidify this new belief so that it starts to become more genuine and authentic to what you genuinely really believe, what you want to do is you want to start to take actions from this new belief instead. That's what I did with starting this podcast. You guys know that I had a few limiting beliefs that were connected to my fears around starting this podcast. So in order to shift the power from those beliefs, first I identified them and identified where in my childhood memory that they were first ever connected to or formed. Then, anytime I was triggered, I just simply acknowledged that I had the limiting belief and that it was there. That's it. No letting go, no releasing or worrying about any of that stuff. I just simply kept acknowledging the belief anytime it was triggered. I then also formed new beliefs that were more in alignment with my true reality and that were in alignment with the reality that I also wanted to bring in. My new beliefs that I formed, where I put my thoughts and my focus on, were that my energetic gifts are gifts that are to be shared and to be celebrated. And my other belief was that I am heard and I am seen. And then I took small steps and actions from these new beliefs, which helped to further anchor in these new beliefs and shift my power and focus onto these new beliefs instead. And look where it got me. I'm episode 5 or 6, I don't even know now, into doing an actual podcast where I'm being heard, where I'm celebrating my gifts and sharing my energetic gifts with you guys. Now, I'm also going to be really straight up with you guys and honest. It did take some time and some willingness on my part to put my power into these new beliefs instead. But, breaking all of that down is going to have to be another episode on its own for another day. But I definitely will do that at some point. So I really encourage you guys to start forming the habit of identifying your limiting beliefs each time that you are emotionally triggered. as the more you continue to do this, the more you realize that your beliefs are actually not true in reality, and then you give less and less value or power to them. And what you'll find is, in time, the limiting belief will actually then have less and less of an effect on you as you're no longer feeding into it or giving it any energy or power. Not only that, as you stop putting your power or energy into it, then the universe will actually give you less and less experiences that reflect this limiting belief. Now, how long this might take is actually something that is going to be unique to you and your journey. And I just want to gently remind you guys to try to avoid measuring your journey in terms of time, as there's no one set way, nor is there one set time frame in which transformation can happen. And it's also an important reminder not to compare yourself to anyone else either. But what I will say is that once you get into the habit of identifying your limiting beliefs every time you're triggered, then these limiting beliefs can actually shift just like that. Look at what happened to me, this week. Old Terry, that used to hold on to the old limiting beliefs for many, many decades, would have seen this event as another example of what a burden my gifts are, and I would have continued to reinforce that old belief. But this time, because I had actually been actively working on identifying this limiting belief over the last 4 months, it was only after, a couple of hours that, I broke the trigger down and recognized that, oh my gosh, look, I've just defaulted and slipped into that old pattern. I choose not to put my power or focus into that because I know it's not true. And so, after me recognizing or acknowledging that, my thoughts and feelings about it completely subsided and didn't return. And remember, if you want to, you can try the other perspective, which is whenever you're ready, if you want to, you can try out introducing a new belief and then putting your power and energy and focus and actions into that new belief instead. Then just wait and see what experiences and what reality the universe will bring in for you then. Well, you guys, I know that was quite a bit of information and we did touch on a few heavy topics today, but I really hope that it inspires you to get started on making note or recording your triggers and getting to the root of them and identifying your limiting beliefs. And of course, if you're finding this information helpful or useful in any way, it would help me out big time if you share with friends and also if you hit subscribe and leave a rating or a review, because this really helps to rank my podcast and helps other people to have access to this information and to see it. And of course, head on over to my Instagram at @myeverydayalchemy, and why not share with me what you've been manifesting, or share with me what kind of signs or synchronicities you've been noticing lately. I love hearing about these stories. They're the best. So just tag me in a post or just DM me and I can share it on my feed or my stories. And now I just want to end today's episode with sharing you this little note from my friend that she'd actually written to me a couple of years ago that I found. It's moments like this where I allow myself to take a step back, to not worry, or to plan this or to plan that, or have to know which ball lands next. Instead, I just pause and take this moment to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time and sharing what's in my heart, and so much love. Such a beautiful reminder to always be in gratitude no matter what. So with that in mind, thanks so much you guys for listening in today and have a really great week. Well, that's it for today, guys. And if you like today's episode, please like and follow us on our socials. Share this podcast with friends, and why not leave this podcast a review? Oh, and hang out an extra minute if you want some high vibe laughs. Oh gosh, oh god, I just dropped the headphones. Oh god. You guys have, I read this joke and I was laughing so much that I just, my hands were flailing and I just whacked a bunch of stuff off my bench, the headphones and some water. It's fine. Okay, so I'm going to read it to you. Why can't you hear a pterodactyl go to the bathroom? Because the P is silent.